Hey there, Banditos! Happy New Year and welcome to the first episode of the Bandits for the year 2024. Where, as always, we bring you interviews of your favorite comic book creators of yesterday and today. By how? We fling open the doors of your local comic book shop. That's how we do it. But before we do that, what do you say we introduce ourselves? It's been a while since we've talked to you, and it's been a while that the three of us have been together. I'm Joe Marcello.
I'm Warren Phillips.
I'm Mike Farah.
And what better way to kick off a new year than with an amazing guest, a comic book heavy hitter, someone who we want to talk to for quite a while, but has now become available for us to do so. We're talking about none other than Mike Carlin. Mike Carlin is an amazing comic book creator, writer. He's written so many amazing titles for both DC and Marvel, and we were so thrilled that we were able to talk to him. Having just been, left DC Comics and free to do whatever he wants, really. And he chose to talk to us.
Yeah, it's so great to talk to Mike because we've spoken to so many people who've worked with him and said so many incredible things about him. And to find out it's all true, it was really, really wonderful. Not only has he worked editing books, but he's also worked in the animation department for DC and put out some really wonderful content.
Yeah, Mike is an editor extraordinaire. I think we've used that title before, but really applies to Mike. Just the work he did on Superman alone in the 90s and pulling together the Triangle era and the Death of Superman, the Return of Superman, Reign of the Superman, all of that stuff that we grew up on. And then not to mention all the other titles and storylines that he oversaw. He's just an extraordinary editor and person, and we were glad to have him. So let's get to it. This is Mike Carlin.
We're talking to none other than Mike Carlin. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Oh, I always knew I'd end up in the dollar bin. You sure there's not a quarter bin still?
I wish.
That's our next podcast.
Yeah.
I'll be there.
So we're gonna kick it off the same way we do with everyone, and we're gonna ask you how you first discovered comics.
My story is boring and easy. Even though I'm really old, the 60s, my mother was a comic fan. So she got it. And she was a big Superman fan and Wonder Woman fan. She didn't really go for Batman, but I had my TV show to get me on that. And she was a big EC horror comics fan as well. So she was the coolest mom of the 60s, I have to say. And so she actually read about a comic convention in the newspaper in '69, and it was one of Phil Seuling's conventions in New York. And she brought me to the convention, and she went around with my list of comics that I wanted, and I got autographs while she haggled with the dealers. So it was that's how I got in. It was easy.
Now, do you still have any of those comics?
I have a couple, but honestly, before I moved to California, I had moved a couple of times in my life, and I swore that I would never move my comics again because it's such a hassle. And there's so many of them. And I had a lot of stuff in, now collected in things like archives, which didn't exist when I started. And honestly, I've been in the business for 40 years. So there's a point where you're not collecting anymore and you're just acquiring.
Right.
And there was just a lot of stuff. So I sold a lot of my actual original comics right before we moved to LA. So I had them until 2010. And I kind of wish I brought them with me since Warner Brothers was paying for the move. So I should have just had them come here, and then I could have gone through. I would have had time to go through them, but I only had like 2 months notice before I was moving. So it was kind of a sudden and quick. I swore I'd never move them again. So, and I never really looked at them. They were in the basement, and they probably would have been destroyed in a flood by now anyway. So it worked out. Somebody hopefully is owning them and hugging them and taking care of them.
Well, it's funny you say that. We have all. No, I'm just kidding.
So I understand that you did your sort of break into comics or your introduction to comics, outside of discovering them, as it were, was as an intern in high school at DC
Yeah.
Comics.
Yeah, I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to be a comic book artist. And I also liked animation a lot. So I went to in New York called the High School of Art and Design. And once again, my mother found out about it and she had me go and take the entrance exam where you had to draw things and bring a portfolio. And I got in. And once I was in, I was taking cartooning classes and I got selected to be one of the 4 interns that were sent to DC Comics in 1974. And that was pretty cool. I was literally sitting outside of editor Julie Schwartz's office, and I was like, "Oh, Julie Schwartz is a man. That's funny. I never would have thought of that." Uh, and what's his name? Carmine Infantino was the boss, and he never talked to me, but he smoked a giant cigar like bosses are supposed to, and that was an artist would come in. Mike Grell was an artist who actually talked to us interns, which was really nice of him. And one day Sergio Aragonés came in and he was doing gags for the war comics. And he just came in and he sat down next to us and he said, "Can I borrow a pencil?" And I had a pencil because I'm a good intern. And I lent him my pencil and he said, "Time me." And he took a blank piece of paper and he came up with a gag, penciled and inked it in 20 minutes. And it was great. It was something about a soldier who needed a light for his cigarette, and a guy came through. He ran off to get a flamethrower and set the guy on fire. It was hilarious. And then Sergio stole my pencil. So it was pretty fun. It was very cool. The other highlight was definitely a bizarre thing in that Burt Ward actually came into the office in costume one day. And on TV, he wore tights, I think. But this day, he just shaved his legs. So I don't know if I'm unlucky, but I got to shake his hand and he said, "Hello, citizen." And it was pretty awesome. And that was only, that was 8 years after the TV show came on. So it was still pretty fresh. So I was pretty stoked about that. And it was cool to be an intern, man. I got to tell you.
It sounded like it was, I don't know. What were you expecting going into that internship? Did you know what to expect of a comic company and how it worked?
Well, I mean, I still thought that it was like, I didn't really think that the artist sat around the office and drew. I was hoping Neil Adams would come by, and I did get to see, Jose Luis Garcia Lopez and Joe Kubert, but they really nobody really had the time of day for. I mean, we weren't even college interns; we were high school interns. So, what were the odds that we were going to stick around and actually work out? So it was just like they were busy and they didn't have a lot of need to deal with us. So, I mostly interacted with the people in the production office, who are names you might know or might not know. But at the same time, it was like DC was still considered a pretty old school company. A lot of the guys still came in on, and there was a couple of guys around the office like Denny O'Neil and Carrie Bates and Elliot Magan who did not fit that mold, but it was definitely a little bit like an insurance company still. So these few things that I told you about were kind of what I was hoping it would be like all the time. But it was still pretty cool. I mostly just was asked to Xerox artwork as it came in. And that was when I realized, Xeroxing Bernie Wrightson pages and Walt Simonson Manhunter pages and Kirby Commandy pages, I realized I was not going to be a superhero artist and I should stick to doing funny comics. And that's what I did. And I broke in from after going to college, I broke into Crazy magazine, so I ended up doing the more humorous stuff rather than, any superhero stuff. I never really got to draw a superhero comic.
I was about to say, jumping to Crazy, and you mentioned that DC sort of had that life insurance mentality. We've heard from other people, it's very old school guys at shirts and ties. It was a
Yeah,
place of business. When
that
you
was
get to
real.
Marvel, yeah, was that sort of a whole different vibe?
Oh, Marvel was like a bullpen. Marvel was Stan Lee's bullpen. It was definitely, way more fun.
Mm.
And by the time I got there, I mean, the internship was 74. I finished high school, went through college, and I had teachers there who were Harvey Kurtzman and Will Eisner. So those were names I dropped to get my interview for Crazy magazine. And then just being up at Crazy, it was just like they were all regular people and they dressed so that they could play volleyball at lunchtime, and they were, it was kind of fun. It was definitely a much better, different atmosphere for creating comics, I thought. And there was some fun and games and goofing around. And after I did about a year with Crazy as a freelance writer artist, just being around the office, Larry Hama, the editor of Crazy, said, "Hey, you want to be an assistant editor?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then I was like, "What's that? I don't even know how to do that." And Mark Gruenwald had just been promoted to editor, and I interviewed with him for that job. And then I ended up getting a steady job on staff, which was great. Mark was just fun. We became literally best friends right from the start. And, I was at his wedding, and it was just like really just fun. And Mark was a mischievous character who definitely he encouraged the morale to stay up at Marvel. He was definitely, and when he died, it was definitely a loss for Marvel's mentality and momentum, I think.
If you don't mind me asking, what does an interview like that usually? What do they talk to you about? What are they looking for specifically?
Well,
And
for assistant editor,
Mm.
it was great, and it was easy to talk to Grunwald about comics, and I was enough of a fan that it was really kind of easy. I don't think I could actually get in now as an assistant editor. I think they actually make you take proofreading tests and all kinds of hard things, and I just he just said, "What was your favorite storyline in a comic?" And I said, honestly, the Kree-Skrull War was my favorite story. And he was like, "Oh, that's a good one." And then we were just bonding on that stuff.
Mhm.
And it was things like that. So I didn't have to take any like actual tests. And so that was easy. It was actually once I got fired at Marvel and I called up DC and they said, "Well, we might have a proofreader job, so you can come over here and take the proofreader test." And all right. And I took the proofreader test and I made notes and I did all this stuff, and someone else got the job, and they were definitely better for the job than I was. But Dick Giordano said that he goes, "All of your answers said you maybe would be better as an editor." And I was like, "That's what I wanted anyway. So why did you make me take a test?" I hate tests. And the one thing about not working at DC anymore and being retired, no more tests,
There you go.
except for doctors and stuff.
Oh.
Still need more tests.
And now that I'm retired, I'm old enough to need a lot of that doctor stuff.
So you answered the question I had was, how did you move to DC? But
That
how
was
did
easy.
you?
That was decided for me.
There you go. So, but how did you end up on the Superman titles?
That was also easy for me.
Okay.
Because basically, I don't think Dick looked at my proofreader test and said, "This guy should be an editor." I think they had somebody working with John Byrne on Superman who was going to be losing his editor, Andy Helfer, who was going to go and start up the Justice League franchise there. And that was a big hit. too. So that he needed to spend his time on that book. So they needed an editor to work with John Byrne. And I had worked with John on Fantastic Four. And John said, yeah, I like Mike. I can work with him. So he was a big part of getting me in. And he happened to be doing Superman. So that's where I landed. And it is still pretty, it was still pretty easy to say I know my Superman stuff, so I didn't really have a problem with that. And I also knew my John Byrne stuff, so that was easy too.
Yeah, I was going to ask. I mean, did you have any trepidation or just, Superman?
No, I was like, thank God I got a job. I was like, I got fired at Marvel, and then I got married a month and a half later. And there's nothing worse than walking down the aisle with someone else's daughter and not having a job. That's a bad feeling.
Mhm.
I do not recommend that.
No.
I did freelance over that summer, and Dick Giordano did come through with the job. On my birthday, October 6th, 1986, I started at DC, and I ended up being there almost 37 years. So it was good for all of us.
So a happy landing.
Yeah, it worked out great. And I got plenty of really good opportunities that I would not have gotten if I was at Marvel, because Marvel just wasn't offering the same kind of opportunities. I got to write a bunch of Superboy TV shows with Andy Helfer that Marvel, most of these TV shows and movies, they don't let comic book people in. It was definitely a good time to have switched over. So
wait a sec, you're talking about the was it ABC?
It was syndicated.
Superboy
Was a syndicated show.
Where they changed the Superboy, the guy who was playing him?
They changed Superboys, and people never saw it because once it ended, they never showed it anywhere.
I remember that one.
So I've gotten no royalties from my stories that I wrote.
Oh yeah.
But we did manage. Myself and Helfer were kind of liaisons for the show, so we would read all the scripts and give them notes. And we got people like Denny O'Neil in there to write scripts. We got Mark DeMatteis to write scripts for them. Carrie Bates ended up with a staff job on the show, and so did DeMatteis. So we had a lot of comic book folks get in there, which is really great and just doesn't happen often enough. I mean, I think if you have a problem with a movie or a TV show, it probably could have been solved if they were hiring people who were writing either the comics or even the animation. I think, the Paul Dini's and Bruce Timms of the world and Alan Burnett's could do a way better job than most of the guys working on our stuff on movies and TV. So it was definitely a good experiment. And then, the show was kind of cheap, so it was never a giant hit. But at the same time,
Superman fans really enjoyed it.
Yeah,
that's what we had at the time.
If you were a Superman fan, I'm sure you didn't enjoy the first season.
Well,
the second and third and fourth seasons got better and better as it went along. I definitely think.
As a young kid watching it, I was like, "Oh, so they're going with Lana." Okay. So
he was in school. He was
he was in school, but at the same time, we're all kind of just. I think we're conditioned. If there's going to be. Because if he's Superman or Superboy
Superboy, and that was
he was in the suit, so I don't know, it should be Lois. But at any rate,
well, that was the part of the fun for me. I mean, I am a fan of comics, and I was, I got to go. I went to this was the weirdest thing to do. I got to go to a hotel room with producer Ilya Salkind, the guy who made Superman the movie that I liked, and he goes, "We want you and me." It was me and Jeanette Kahn, and we were looking at the guy who they wanted to play Superboy. And it was John Hames Newton, and he came out in the Chris Reeve Superman suit from another room. And I was like, how did I get in this room? This is bizarre and creepy and weird. That I was standing here saying, "Turn around, let me see you with the cape." And luckily I couldn't see his butt, so that was good. You might want to edit that. No, don't. No, leave it in. Leave it in. Leave it in. But it was definitely like it was just weird that I got to even be in that room. I got to go to the premiere of Superman 4. I haven't gotten to go to any other movie premieres. Sorry to say, I got to go to Superman 4, and it was in Cleveland, which is another thing. But I tie his bow tie for his tuxedo, and I got to share a limo with Noel Neill, and Kirk Allen was there, the first live action Superman from the serials. And it was like, again, I always kept saying, how did this happen? It was always very appreciated, and I never took any of it for granted. I loved it.
That's
So
fantastic.
one other thing from, well, the heyday of our collecting time. So obviously Superboy was on TV, was when you were editor of the Superman titles, is all of a sudden these little triangles started appearing on the comics. I'd love to know a little bit about the origin of those triangles, and if you were the one who sort of came up with the system.
It was all me. I apologize, or I take all the credit.
It was awesome.
I agree.
Loved
And
the triangles.
it was created completely selfishly. I did it because I couldn't keep track of where stuff was. If I had to go looking back 6 months to find something, and I couldn't remember if it was Adventures had different numbers than Action had, and it was just impossible to keep it straight. So I came up with the triangles. I originally asked to have them be the Superman shield shape, but for some reason or other, the higher ups said, no, that'll diminish the trademark on the shield shape. And I was like, you mean the diamond shape that everybody uses? Okay. And then eventually later, as I stopped being the main editor, but when I was the boss, I just asked again, and they said, sure, go ahead. And I was like, oh, come on. They turned it into a diamond shape eventually anyway. But yeah, it was just for me to keep it straight, and just starting with the first book that came out every year got a #1. There was no nefarious #1 sell better kind of thinking. It was all just, I need to be able to go backwards quickly and easily and keep it straight. So it helped me, and I'm glad that people liked it because it turned out to be a popular thing.
Yeah.
I think we messed up once or twice. We have a couple of double numberings in there, but I would be the last guy to say we never made mistakes.
It was great.
It
Sorry,
was-
I don't want to cut you off, but it is so iconic with that time period, with those comics. I remember reading when they were going to discontinue that, and I was so disappointed because I just loved how, I could jump in at any point and I know where to go from there, because
it was easy to backtrack.
It was easy. And I mean, look, friend of ours has his own podcast that he dedicated. I mean, he has like 5 of them, but one of which is based on the Triangle era of Superman.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and you may have actually talked about it. I don't know.
What's his name?
Anthony Desiato.
Oh, I don't think I've done that one yet.
I mean, he is even
he may
more
have
of a
asked for me
Superman fan than I.
When I was at DC, they had a policy where they weren't letting, us do interviews or appear on panels at conventions without approval, and it was just like,
okay, so we'll rub it in his face.
It's ridiculous. Well, send them my way. I'm really, I just don't want to do 10 a week.
No,
that's the job. That's like having my job again, and you guys don't pay as well. I'm sorry to tell you.
That's okay. That's all right.
We understand that.
We don't even pay ourselves as well. So, but
yeah, I'm glad that. The thing is, it made sense to me that they would stop the triangles because they weren't interlocking the stories anymore. It's like, we created the interlocking stuff by accident, and it was just like, once it was clearly there to stay, that was when I said, I got to do something to make this easy for myself and everybody. It was, of course, very selfless, even though it was selfish. So it was just like, it made sense for them to not link them together because, people didn't buy all of them anyway. We tried to make it kind of small, so it wasn't part of the actual issue numbering. We kept the regular issue numberings. Now they start over from number 1 every time a character, farts. So I don't. They're allowed to have characters fart now that there's no comics code. You know that,
That's
right?
nice.
Yeah, no, it's fine, man.
Sense of realism.
That's the only comics I buy now.
Well, yeah, with the scratch and sniff kind. I know.
Farty McGee. That's
I was just waiting for the comics code to go away. Get my fix of the fart in comics. You basically answered a follow-up, which was the were the farts intentional? No. Was it intentional to have an interlocking system? And you said that it wasn't. It was sort of happened by mistake. Could you just tell us a little bit about why, or you just kind of landed on it somehow?
No, It happened slowly by accident. I mean, part of it was the first year of John Byrne and Marv Wolfman and Jerry Ordway doing the 3 Superman titles. It was Superman was one book and Adventures was another, and they didn't link together necessarily. And then Action was kind of where John got to play in the rest of the DC universe. So he got to, draw the other characters. So it was kind of like a team up book, like Brave and Bold. And it would be Superman and the Metal Men and Superman and, the Spectre and stuff like that. So there was no real direct link between the stuff. And then when Marv left and John started writing Adventures as well, it did seem like a natural thing to remember what your last story was and just have it be connected. And they weren't major connections, but there definitely were little story links behind the scenes, and not C stories maybe would connect a little bit. And then when John left, we cut down to 2 books for a little while, just because nobody else did as many books as John Byrne. And Ordway got kind of promoted to being a writer at that time. And I think it worked out to be a good try on my part. And I hired Roger Stern, who I'd worked with at Marvel, and he was a friend of John's. So he had done some Superman annuals and things with us. So he was kind of in the mix a little bit. He did some fill-ins here and there. And he came on, and it just seemed right, since it was such a small little clump of guys. It was me and Ordway and Stern, and we would just talk on the phone, and we would just kind of keep the story together. Because, no matter what was going on in the books, no matter who was doing the books, Superman always sold more than the others, because that was considered the flagship of the books. But for my money, Adventures of Superman still had the numbering from the real Superman comics, so that was something. And Action Comics was the first comic. So it's like, these should all have been the flagship comic in a weird way, but Superman always sold more. So we just wanted to kind of help the other books along a little bit, if we could, without it being a hassle, because it was only me and those 2 guys. So it was very simple. Then when we started getting that 3rd book going, I guess Jurgens had done an annual for me, and he was also a writer. He had done Booster Gold. He kind of joined the mix, although we had George Perez writing, I guess, Action for a while, or Adventures, I guess, with Jurgens drawing it. And it just was easier to kind of help out a story and, join in the middle rather than come up with something completely. You had your own little story to do, but you had some other fallback stuff that you could use. And I guess around that time, I had a different colorist on each of the books too. Then I hit on the idea of having one guy color all the books, so that all matched, and he would keep track, and I didn't have to worry about it, because he would say, hey, Jimmy Olsen was wearing a denim jacket at the end of this story. I'll color this a denim blue. And then he would remember to put him in a denim jacket in the next story. So it worked out really well to have one guy kind of cover all that stuff, and coloring a book a week was kind of a normal load for a colorist, so it was really kind of, again, it was all an accident, and I kind of wish we didn't do it because it was a big hassle, and it was really hard to keep that all together for so long. And then as creators would go, that the deal was, you got to check your ego at the door. Really, no joke. It's not about any of us. It's only about Superman. It's got to be just about building up Superman. And everybody agreed and joined in. And I think we had a lot of great talent on the books. And I wouldn't say that anybody was a superstar, although they may have ended up being a little more bankable after doing Superman. So that was a good thing for us. It was definitely fun to do it that way. And it gave me a sense of belonging. I felt like I actually mattered. I wasn't just a clerk. And it was kind of good. And the big secret for how we pulled it off was that I had this system of folders where every single piece of paper that came in, whether it was a piece of pencil art or ink art or a plot or a script, everything would be photocopied and put in these folders for all of the pencilers, inkers, writers, and colorists, so they could see the progress of everybody, and everybody would get this package every week. So we'd send out packages on Friday for Saturday delivery. Then you'd have the weekend to look at all the stuff and just see what was going on. And you could see it was kind of like a healthy competition, because it had people seeing, oh, wow, this guy drew this many pages. I got to try to keep up. Oh my God, this guy drew the greatest cityscape. Wow, I gotta live up to that too. And it really kept everybody on their toes. And we had our main crew lasted a long time, before and through and after the death of Superman. It was all the same guys for a really long time. And part of it was that this really simple folder system where I just mailed out a package every week. And I don't know if anybody, hopefully, I think Roger Stern probably saved all that stuff. He's a saver. But I don't have any of that stuff.
As Oren, I know you had a question, but I just wanted to just follow up with you. So you said, for the longest time after Death of Superman, you had all the same, people on those titles. And for me, I got into comics just around the Death of Superman, that era. And for the longest time, for me, like those artists and writers were the team. So, like when I saw Dan Jurgens' work and, Ordway and all their work, like they were so iconic to me. And then once they started moving on to other things, I almost, like, as a fan, I was almost hurt and betrayed, because I was like, but wait, you're the guys, you do this. How can anyone else come and do it? And
well, we did that to bother you, and it worked.
Clearly, and it upset me, and there were many years of therapy over it. But
excellent.
But I bought more comics, so it's okay.
Well, yeah, the idea was that Jerry Ordway would leave and go work on Shazam, so you have to go buy that now.
I did.
My question would be is, when you're recruiting people for these projects, what were you looking for? Were you looking for a specific writing or artistic talent, or are you looking for personalities that this is a personality that would work well with maybe someone else when you're putting a team together?
Yes.
All of that.
That's the answer. Yeah, it was, obviously, again, you couldn't come in and think you were the star of the show, because that, you'd have to have a personality of cooperation, be a buddy kind of character to get along with people. At the same time, if you look at the first bunch of guys I brought over, I mean, Jurgens was a DC guy, but everybody else was like kind of Marvel guys. I mean, Louise Simonson was a Marvel person, and John Bogdanov and Roger Stern, Kerry Gamble. They were all Marvel guys. And I was, and, you know, I guess Ordway, he inked the Fantastic Four over Byrne while I was the editor. So he kind of did some Marvel work. But I got, first it was just people that I had worked with before and I knew would be able to do the job. And then as time went on, it was like, you know, I knew Ron Friends also from Marvel. But then there was like someone like Stuart Immonen came along at DC, and he was just, I loved his art. It was more about his actual art. And then he had a very easygoing personality, and he kind of fit in great. Tom Grummett was a real perfect fit for so long, and he was a kind of a DC guy. He was doing Titans at that time, and I ended up being the new Titans editor for about 5 minutes, so we got to know each other then, and it was just really easy to see that he could do it. And he was kind of like a faster version of Kerry Gamble, so he kind of fit in really nicely. And he got along with Jerry Ordway. So these things, everything was just fitting together nicely. And I worked with Jackson Geis at Marvel as well, you know, so he was another one. So it was, you know, people who did, they all, and there was no house style really. You know, Jackson Geis does not look like Tom Grummett. And they're both okay, and they're both fine. And we weren't trying to do a house style. We were trying to make, the story was the house style. And that's hopefully what we could get across, is people understood the differences in styles by that point. Not everybody had to look like Kurt Swan. You didn't need to put, you know, a Kurt Swan face on a Jack Kirby drawing. You didn't need to do that anymore. And so it was good. It was good to have variety too. And that way, if you didn't want to follow the whole story and you only liked Jackson Geis, you could just buy the one book. There was no anybody's arm here, really. We were offering options, and it worked out. I hope that answered. I don't know if it did.
No, 100% did. Yeah.
So wanted to talk a little bit about a tiny overlooked storyline called The Death of Superman. And you know, we had Joe Illidge on a couple weeks ago. Not sure if you're familiar with him, but you know, he pointed, he's kind of a student of editorial, really. Like he talks very eloquently about you know, the role of an editor and being sort of the ringmaster of the entire show. And he, you know, brought up as one of the crowning achievements of this type of work was, you know, The Death of Superman and all of these subsequent stories. And so, you know, without belaboring, obviously, the decision to kill him, because we've heard that story a lot of times.
Everybody hears that story, but they don't always believe that story, because I still have people telling me that it was because Warner Brothers wanted to make a TV show that we were told we had to do something different than get Superman married. And it's like, no, that was all our idea. We wanted to tie in to Lois and Clark. So not everybody always believes the story when I tell it. But yeah, so how do you come up with the death of Superman? You know, it's one of the tools in the storytelling handbook. All the characters die and come back. This is our version of mythology, you know. This is what the gods do. They die and come back all the time. It was easy.
Yeah. So once you made the decision to kill him, how difficult was it to, I guess, coordinate the subsequent storylines and keep the energy going? Like you had Funeral for a Friend, you had the Reign of the Superman, and you had the Return. I mean, this was very complicated, interlocking, you know, storylines that just kind of led into each other.
It was what we were doing already anyway, really. It just was the world just decided it was a more important story. We didn't decide that. The world did. So the books were already that tight anyway, and we were keeping it all together. And at the meeting where we did say, all right, we're not going to get to do the wedding yet, every meeting we've ever had, when we got stuck for an idea, Jerry Ordway would say, let's just kill him. And this time they said, let's kill him. And I said, all right, wise guys, then what? And we came up with the funeral for a friend stuff right away. And it was all about how it was kind of like what we thought the real world's reaction would be if there was a Superman and he died. And it was so fun for the guys in the room to be making up that part of the story, because really the death of Superman is not a story, it's a fight. There's nothing to that at all. But the funeral for a friend was what it was all about. That was what Superman means to us, and it was what we hoped Superman meant to the world, and it turned out that that was the case. So it was really it would have been hard to keep them from doing that story, because they wanted to tie it together. They wanted it to be coherent. They wanted it to be the big story that it turned out to be, to the point where sales got to be so high during that we started being nervous and said, oh shit, we better make this pay off. We can't just have Superman sit up in the coffin and wave and say, hey, I feel better. It had to be bigger than that. And we would talk amongst ourselves, and everybody, all the guys were like, let's do something that they don't expect. Let's make Superman really different. Let's make Metropolis different. Let's make everything's different. Everything's different. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. And they all had different ideas. And I was like, we can't do all of these. And then Louise Simonson said, well, why can't all of them? And I was like, I guess we could. And that's when it became the 4 Superman. And that was not part of the original plan, but it was part of us saying, the world is watching now. We got to give them the big ending to this. We got to give them a giant punchline. And I think they all came up with great stuff, and they all came up with different individual characters. And DC, the universe, benefited by those characters staying around for a long time, even after our story ended. And the reward for the creators was that they got to go off and do whatever they wanted, and they didn't have to tie in with anybody anymore if they didn't want to. Steel and Superboy didn't have to tie into the regular line of comics ever again if they didn't want to. And it was like a reward almost. So it was like, it worked out great. And I think that we did come up with a big payoff to the storyline. And the one thing that we never get right, and nobody else gets right, is that we actually ended the story, even though it was long, we still ended it with people wanting more. And that is the key. Half of the stuff we do in comics goes on too long. We're like old Netflix series, 13 episodes. Well, this could have been 6 and it would have been great, but it's not great at 13. So if we had kept, it would have been a drag. And I think that we ended it at a good point, and that didn't happen every time. We did a lot of stories after that went on 1 issue too long, 10 issues too long. Because you never know. You got to plan it all ahead of time too. You never know what the world's tolerance is going to be for things.
So coming out of the death of Superman and all those subsequent storylines, as you mentioned, is the characters that came out: Superboy, Cyborg, Superman, Steel, Eradicator. And when you initially created them to be part of this, was the intention that they would be around for years to come after that? Or was it, like they'll have their time in the sun and then they'll go away?
Well, we didn't know if they would stick around or not. Again, that's the kind of thing you don't get to really decide. The readers decide that stuff. And, the characters became pretty instantly popular, and it was pretty easy to see we could expand the universe that way. But again, we knew not to tie the books together, because 4 books a month was already pushing it. And to tie Steel and Superboy in on a regular basis would have been nutty and kind of wrong. At the same time, it's like, how many characters have been created in the last 20 years that have stuck around? Name two. I say Damian Wayne is one, and I would even argue that Harley Quinn is another, and that was maybe 30 years ago. So it's like that's it. And the key to these characters sticking around is when another creator wants to use them.
Mm-hmm.
It's one thing to have Grant Morrison always want to use Damian Wayne, but it's another thing to have somebody else come in and say, I got an idea for Damian Wayne because he's so different. He's a new Robin. We haven't ever, even all the new Robins acted like the old Robin. So how about this guy is really something to work with? And Harley Quinn was a great breath of fresh air, and she came from the animated show. She wasn't even from the comics. So it was just like, if somebody else wants to use Steel and Superboy, that's what decides that they stick. The Eradicator, not so much. People didn't really seem to need him around. He had a long story before he got even into the Death of Superman story. So he wasn't somebody you could identify with. He was he was Kryptonian, and he was a construct, or whatever you want to call him. And obviously Cyborg wasn't going to be getting his own book because he was the bad guy.
No, he didn't. But
Spoiler alert.
But I honestly, out of a lot of those characters, I mean, he keeps coming back, and they keep bringing him back around. They keep
using Doomsday, and he doesn't even have a personality.
Well, so I'm glad you mentioned that, because all right, I had a couple of questions. One, what are your thoughts on them bringing back Doomsday? Because as a fan, it kind of, I think, cheapens, like the badass persona that he was originally presented. Well, and in that, he killed Superman, and he was this unstoppable machine. But if you keep bringing him back, and, it just seems like, I don't know, it doesn't seem as powerful.
But he's a good visual. It's like a lot of Superman's villains are guys in business suits. The prankster, ooh, Mr. Z, Lex Luthor. These are not, Luthor's, people like him in the battle suit. They don't necessarily like the business suit. So, and Doomsday has a good visual. He is definitely a good monster to trot out every now and then.
Right.
The reality is, he's not a good persona. He doesn't have a personality, and he was never created to have a personality. He was supposed to be a force of nature. He was a hurricane. He was, a tsunami. He was an earthquake. He was something, a natural disaster that Superman handled all the time, but this one actually hit back, and it was good for us. I might not have brought him back as often as they do.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't even sold on giving him such a clear and clean-cut origin. I liked him being mysterious myself, but it would also have been dumb not to do a Doomsday origin when Doomsday was hot, and they've done some things that were, maybe obvious, but at least interesting. Didn't he get a personality at one point from, was it Luthor or Brainiac or one of those guys?
So
I don't know.
Yeah, in his evolution over the years, like, he kind of became somewhat aware of his mortality. And I guess once they were able to kind of snap that into his head, or once he realized that, he was much more beatable.
So you're the guy who doesn't like Smart Hulk.
I don't mind Smart Hulk, but I don't know. I'm the type of guy, like, if you have a character that is, like, something like that shouldn't be brought back frequently, which is kind of like why I enjoy the Eradicator character so much, because they only go to that well once in a while, like, because it doesn't cheapen the cachet, if you will.
Eradicator and Doomsday as well. They don't come with a backstory that involves identifiable connections to humanity. I mean, they're just not the same. Now, Doomsday is like a victim, basically. His origin story makes him a giant victim. It's kind of it is a pathetic story. It's terrible. But again, unless you're going to take that step, Hulk has had a comic book every month since I was a kid.
Right.
So you can't just have him running around saying Hulk smash. You got to do something to jazz it up once in a while.
Right.
And then make it sad when he becomes Hulk smash again. It's like there's a sense to that to a degree. So it's like I see the need to do this. When you're doing periodicals, you do need to kind of keep it fresh as much as you can. And if you have a writer who can actually find an angle, you should try it, and because you can always stop it and always get out of it. And it's not like Doomsday had his own comic, so it's like, I think that he's okay to use every now and then. He's kind of better if other characters try to harness the earthquake in him,
Right,
and either fail or succeed or whatever. But it's like he's a viable character with no character.
fair enough.
You
So
know?
I want to jump to something that's near and dear to all of us, and that's the DC animation. In my opinion, the DC animation kicks ass.
Yes.
All those shows, they just got it right, and I rewatch because it really inspires me, and it just makes me love you and everyone else who does what you do behind the scenes. Love you more. Is the Villains series? It was like probably like a 40-minute show, not show, but like it was on like HBO and
one of the extras or
right,
documentaries.
and
Yeah.
you were all it tied into the Villains comics that were out at the time,
Right.
and it was so inspiring as a comic book
Oh,
fan
that's great to
because
hear.
I was like, man, these guys get it, and that's why the comics are as good as they are at the during that period, and the animation is just amazing. And as DC fans, I think a lot of us, we obviously watch the MCU stuff and we're like, that's awesome and they're killing it. Not so much now, but whatever. But we're as fans, we cringe and we cry a bit on the inside to see the movies, because they're just harkens back to what your original point is, that if they have people like Paul Dini and Bruce Timm involved in it, then they would do it. Now,
well, that's where I would be a real fraud and a liar if I took credit for any of this animation stuff, even though I ended up working on the animations with those people for the last 13 years. But those guys love DC stuff. They love it and they know it, and they rarely want to break it. They want to revere it. Now, like I did when I was the editor on the Superman comics, I felt like I was very reverential to Superman, but I was also not afraid to do something different or new or try something, because you can always get out of it in comics. You can always go backwards and say, whoops, and Bobby is in the shower if you need him to be. And it's like, that's the way it is. You can get out of it. At the same time, these guys, they knew what it was supposed to be. They knew what it was supposed to evoke. And my job became really easy in the last years of my time at DC, because they didn't need a lot of help. I mean, if anything, I was there to say, this part here is not really kind of working. Why don't you try this character instead? So I had to do, more archival help. I was there for that. Or, really, guys, this character would never do this, and we should really try to not have Batman shoot somebody ever. But it was like they wouldn't even try that stuff because they know better, and they really are fans first, and they all get it. And the guys in charge are fans, and they know the stuff. And I felt lucky that they let me in the club there for a while, and I got to help, and that was kind of great.
Do you think probably not so much now because it looks like there's some hope, a ray of light down the, coming.
It's
Uh,
still a mystery at this point.
yeah, but do you think maybe they were just too afraid to have the comic guys involved in
No,
making the movies?
they
Because
weren't afraid. They were snobs.
okay,
It was
too many,
definitely
too many
they
cooks in the
they
kitchen.
they thought they knew better, and we know movies and comics, and they know cartoons. Cartoons are cute, but they don't make as much money and they don't spend as much money. And it's like, we're not talking about the money, we're talking about the story. And they kind of just thought they didn't need help. And that's the bad attitude. I think that the animation guys were happy for help if it was pertinent. And they were, I mean, maybe, film is a collaborative medium,
Yeah.
but there's one guy calling all the shots. And it seems to me that animation and comics are collaborative mediums too, but there seems to be fewer guys in the pot somehow, and it's easier to gravitate towards just following the guy who seems to know what he's doing, rather than just following the guy who's the sign on his trailer says, "I'm the guy you have to follow." It's definitely a different animal, and I hope it changes a little bit. I mean, James Gunn is talking some good stuff, and he clearly is a fan of the comics. The Guardians of the Galaxy got some obscure stuff. The his Suicide Squad movie got a lot of obscure stuff in there,
Mm-hmm.
and did it the way it was supposed to be, for the most part. And Peacemaker was something that was so nebulous it could have gone any way. And as long as it's not all, and God knows that the DC universe could use some humor to lighten it up. It needs to have some humor. It shouldn't be a slapstick comedy, but it definitely needs to not take itself so seriously. And I have hope. I have hope right now.
Yeah, that always seemed to be the case years ago. Like DC was they were not lighthearted, but like, you know, Marvel always seemed darker and grim and grittier, with maybe exception like Batman. But like, overall, everything was so serious with Marvel and all the issues that they tackle. And DC, excuse me, was
Yeah, but
far less
Mar-
of that. Then something happened, and
I can tell you what happened. I mean, Marvel, first of all, Marvel wasn't always grim. Spider-Man was always joking.
right.
The Thing and the Human Torch had a fun rivalry. They definitely were fun characters. And there was always things like the Impossible Man around. He was the same as Mr. Mxyzptlk. They had all that stuff. But the reality is that DC made a TV show called Batman, and it was a joke. I was 8 years old when it came out, so it seemed serious to me. I didn't know they were making fun or having fun. And at the same time, as I've seen it as a grown up, it kind of it showed up on the scene with a real point of view. It was fully formed, and you got to give them credit for what they did, especially at the time that they did it. There was no creativity like that on a TV show. It was visually creative. It came out with its point and stuck with it, and it burned out kind of quick because of that. But it definitely was a good thing. All we did, and then Super Friends came on as a cartoon, and then all DC did was try to live that down, because it was like, it almost became embarrassing. Every newspaper article about Batman started with Pow and Zap because of that TV show. So it was a knee-jerk reaction, but the right reaction to go super serious with the Tim Burton movies. And that's what they did. And once those things were successes, that was the key to everybody saying we have to make them deadly serious. And although the Batman movies, the Tim Burton movies that evolved into, Batman and Robin and Batman Forever. That ended up reverting back to Batman 66 again. So
Absolutely.
they didn't stick with it. So it kind of didn't sell as well. So there's something in between that was exactly right. Chris Nolan obviously did a great job, made a lot of money for everybody, and they're really defensible, dramatic movies. They could have used a little more humor, in my opinion. And again, not jokes, but just situations that were a little lighter here and there. The Joker had an element of that as a character, but Bane did not. And I think that by the last movie, we were getting a little too heavy again.
Mhm.
And I don't have a lot of stuff to say about the Snyder stuff. Might be time to go.
Your mama taught you well.
Look at the hour. Whoo, boy.
Well, funny enough, we were just coming up on closing, but I wanted to know from you now that with sort of the perspective of having, decades of experience now in DC, you're finally retired from DC. How do you see the future of the comic book industry from this vantage point?
It does. I see it now. It's somebody else's job. And part of the reason why I can tell you that the Snyder stuff was not my favorite is because I don't work there anymore. I mean, if I did work there, I would feel like I would avoid even mentioning it at all, because it's just like, it's not what you do. We feel like, I'm not here to put down stuff either. At the same time, I am optimistic about what can be done. I think if somebody was to own DC Comics and really understand what they bought and really stick by some guns and really make a plan and not expect it to be a gold mine on the first day, I think we could build something there if they wanted to, and same thing with the films. And I think James Gunn, if they actually let him do something, he could do something. Anybody could do something if you are allowed to do it. At the same time, they need to be able to stop somebody if they're doing something that's not working or doesn't really, again, honor the source material. And that doesn't mean your job is to Xerox it and make it the same. It just means that you need to be reverent. You need to care about what it was and what the point of it is, and perpetuate that with the modern spin and with a fresh take. You need to keep adding to this. Your job is to build it up, not to do something that is actually just different, just to be different. That's not the job. Because anybody can put out something called Superman and make it different. We did it. It was Steel and Superboy, and they weren't Superman. That was the point. We proved that you shouldn't try to be Superman. You gotta be Superman to be Superman.
And we're back. Love talking to Mike. So cool to talk to him and really jump into the Triangle era. As a comic book fan who started in the 90s, the Triangles were great. I mean, there were so many titles, and it just kept everything in order for me, because as a new person coming in, you didn't know where things fit in. And I love that. And talking to other Superman fans out there, some of whom have Superman podcasts, they just dedicate entire series to those, which I've been lucky enough to discuss with them. So yeah, it was a great interview.
Well, like most is, he's had so many successful runs on books, and talking about putting the right team together, the right writer, the right inker, the right penciler, the right colorist, all these different components that have to come together, and his decision-making process, and that I thought was absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, all of what Joe said, all of what Oren said, and more. I was just really happy to talk to Mike. He had so many great insights. And, to Oren's earlier point, we were glad that he came to us first. He had at DC a little bit of sort of an official, Mike's off kind of policy over there. And once he retired, he gave us a call, and we were happy to have him. So it was a great conversation. Look forward to maybe having him again sometime. Thank you, Mike Carlin. Thank you, listeners. Thank you, viewers. Thank you for rating 5 stars, reviewing, subscribing, wherever you found this podcast. And we will see you next issue.